The John Campea Show, in association with Designing Hollywood, presents... Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. The Designing Hollywood podcast is dedicated to all things movies, the movie industry, and its talented professionals. And today's episode is sponsored by the United American Costume Company. Today's guest is a London-based costume designer with credits on many acclaimed films. She started her career as an assistant costume designer, working on the likes of Gary Oldman's BAFTA-winning Nil by Mouth, Martin Scorsese's Gangs of New York, Shekhar Kapoor's Elizabeth the Golden Age, I hope I got that right, James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy. After moving on to designing in her own right, her design credits include the BAFTA-winning feature The Legend of Barney Thomson, starring Robert Carlyle and Emma Thompson, Oscar-nominated short film The Black Sheep, directed by Ed Perkins, and most recently, she completed the costume design for season 2 of Hulu's The Great, which, if I might editorialize, is great, written by Tony McNamara. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome costume designer Sharon Long to the Designing Hollywood podcast. Sharon, it is such a great honor.
It's such a great honor to be here.
You know, since one of my favorite things on this show is to look into what our guests have done. And your first credit, I have to ask you about, because when I saw this movie, I was kind of blown away by it. I was like, wow, which was Peter Greenaway's The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. That had to be a crazy film to work on. And I'm just curious, that was your first feature film that you worked on. That was kind of like jumping into the deep end of the pool, wasn't it? What was it like working on that film?
I didn't actually know that I was kind of going to be jumping into it. I had been working with a stylist and assisting her, and she was asked to go on and sort of help with the crowd. It was a Dutch crew completely that Peter Greenaway always worked with.
Mm-hmm.
They were shooting in a small studio in London, and basically the crowd, they hadn't got enough money to dress the crowd, so Jean-Paul Gaultier designed all the principal costumes, which were being sent over, and the wardrobe and the costume designer and the wardrobe team were kind of coping with those because they were coming out of a fashion house and not necessarily quite right for the actors. And they need to just get the crowd in their own clothes and people to kind of just go through what they were wearing and make sure they looked all right. So I was coming from a styling point of view, having worked with a stylist, and that's what they employed. There was about 3 of us, I think. And we just went in, and my stylist happened to be pregnant, so she couldn't go, and I went instead. And
Wow.
thought, this is great. And it was a very strong female crew, and they were really good to us, actually, really, really good. Spent a lot of time with us and explained to us the whole process. And we filmed, and because there wasn't much money, they filmed in each of the coloured sets, and then got rid of it, and then moved. It was the next colour set, and then back again. And they'd redressed a set in another colour, because I think if you remember rightly, you go through all those.
Oh, yeah.
Colours. So things like that were just fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Goodbye to styling. Hello to I stayed for the whole time and got a credit, and that's where I wanted to be, really.
Well, I love hearing those stories, but then, you worked with the who's who of British filmmakers. One of your next credits a couple of years later, you worked on Mike Leigh's Naked, which was another great film. David Thewlis in that role. When you're working with, he's known for doing a lot of not working on scripts or off scripts the way traditional. He does a lot of improv, doesn't he? Mike Leigh is a director.
Yeah.
So as a costume designer, how do you work with a director or a costume supervisor, costume assistant, when you're working with a director like Mike Leigh? Is it more challenging, or do they know with actors? Obviously, it's a little more freeform, but how was it for you, and what was it like in the costume department on a movie like that?
I mean, I think at that point, I found it really interesting the way he worked, because for a start, it's a very small crew, so everybody's very involved, and everybody he was very interested in us I don't know, doing things when the actors were rehearsing and there was nothing we could do and we couldn't get in the room. He kind of expected that people would be reading books or drawing or doing something useful, which was quite nice. People's opinions were listened to. It felt quite collaborative. So although things were developing, because it was, I mean, particularly that piece, it was contemporary costume, which it was Lindy Hemming was the designer. So she sort of designed wardrobes for people. So there were things that could come in and out if necessary. I mean, there was a lot of nuance to the costumes that, people had to think about their characters and whether they'd have something in the pocket. You may never see it as the audience. It was there. I don't think we didn't wash David's clothes. I don't think. I think he sort of stayed in them. They just got thrown at us at the end of the day. But it's just one that I thought it was quite and it's a really interesting way of watching, because you don't quite know what's going to happen. I enjoyed it.
Well, and again, as you move through your career, I'm looking at like one of my favorite films of that era. I mean, it was mid 90s, was Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet, and you were the costume supervisor, and that film is so sumptuous and so gorgeous, and the costumes in that film are insane. Was that
Alex? I worked with Alex quite a lot, actually. Alex Byrne. I supervised that one, and then I went on to assist her.
When you're working on a film of that, in terms of costumes, I would imagine, obviously you've worked on a lot of period films, but that was just sumptuous. Was there anything, are most costume films, obviously there's rentals and there's builds, you're building costumes.
Yeah.
On a film like Hamlet, what was the whole process like? Were those costumes designed from scratch?
The principal's costumes were designed from scratch, yeah.
Now,
and I, as a supervisor, I was doing a lot more with the crowd costumes, which were, I mean, Alex in that one, I think, and we had quite strong colour. She had quite a colour design. So when you had the ladies or the gentlemen of the court, there was a lot of cream and splashes of red and things like that. So quite specific. It was, and it's quite sad actually, because that the some of the dresses that they came in from all over Europe, because they had to be a specific colour. You couldn't go to one costume house. And many years later, I've seen those dresses again, and they're not in quite such good condition, but they were not bad at that point. We were quite lucky. But yeah, no, there was Charlton Heston was in it.
I mean, unbelievable. Now, do you ever get starstruck working on films?
I don't think I mean, I saw Charlton Heston at a distance. I didn't actually, and I got somebody, a dresser who was of similar age to him, to come and look after him. So he was kind of taken care of. But yeah, no, I sort of didn't get so close to him. It was just more organising in the background.
Now, again, after that, you worked on movies like Emma and Great Expectations, and a favorite of mine, The End of the Affair, with Ralph Fiennes. I'm a huge Ralph Fiennes fan. And when I guess I would imagine in the British film industry, everybody sort of would know one another, because you're all working on, you're jumping around and working on these different films. So what is that like for you as you're coming up through the ranks, and is it easier, do you think, to work within the British film industry than, say, Hollywood?
I probably would imagine so. I mean, particularly at that time, it's much bigger now because there's so many more productions happening. I think with social media and things, I mean, I would say for the people of my age and maybe, the next 10 years down, you didn't really know that you could have a job in the film industry.
Right.
And now I think that's quite, everybody knows, and so there's a lot more people in it. I mean, there was a point, I think, where I probably knew everybody, and I certainly don't know everybody now.
Right. Right. Well, when you're working on these kinds of films, do you ever get a sense of in whether they're going to turn out the way you hope they turn out? Because obviously you don't, when you work in the costume department, or you're not always, you can't really see the whole big picture because you're so focused.
I think sometimes I think whether you're whether it's going to look good, but you don't necessarily know whether it's going to be a good film
Right.
and it's going to be quite what you expected it to be. And I think everybody gets lost in their own jobs. I mean, often things get cut and it's a real shame because maybe it took up a lot of time and energy, and you think it's lovely and then it actually either is a headshot or just never even walks through the door, this wonderful dress or something. So I think on I always think the first time that I see something, I'm just looking at my work or the work of the department, and it's only on the second viewing or the third viewing that you're actually watching it as a complete piece. So yeah, I mean, and some obviously there are occasions where it's a turkey, but but you try not to actually, because that would then you'd lose heart.
Well, I would be remiss, especially for our audience, if I did not ask you about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Yes. You're credited as the wardrobe supervisor.
Yeah.
The return of one of the most iconic franchises in Hollywood history. What was it like, first of all, getting that job? And then what was it like working on that job?
Well, I think I don't know. I think the Star Wars franchise still do this, where you actually don't know what the job is that you're getting, really, because you obviously can't read anything. So I took the job without reading a script and knowing the budget or the crew or anything. Actually, I just thought, oh my God, it's Star Wars, I have to take this job. So I took it, and then it kind of unfolded. It was huge for me. It was only, I think, is it my second proper supervising credit? I mean, I supervised naked, but there was only me, the assistant designer, and the designer. So I don't, that's a sort of very tiny kind of supervising job. And I think I'd done Hamlet, and it might be the next one after Hamlet. I can't remember, but yeah, it was enormous for me.
So on a job like
there was 3 units running and a stills unit that was doing all the stuff for the cornflake packets, and we were actually quite a small crew. There was me and 4 people, and I think the crew because the crews are much bigger now. There was a workroom, so there's a whole workroom. There's a design team, but in the people who kind of put the costumes on and wash them at the end of the day and send them and go out to Italy and Tunisia, that was me. And I think at our largest we were 5 all the time, and we had a few sort of day people coming in. It was a funny time. I've got a lot of photographs, actually.
I'll bet. Don't tell anyone. Lucasfilm will come after them.
There was a storm. There was a storm when we were in Tunisia, and everything disappeared under the sand. It had to be dug up, and we still carried on shooting. We shot that day.
Well, I mean, you went on to work on so many cool movies. Again, like with Ray Fiennes, again, The Constant Gardener, Elizabeth, The Bank Job with Jason Statham, Robin Hood, The Social Network, Jack the Giant Slayer, 300, Guardians of the Galaxy. So you worked on a lot of not just period pieces, but also genre pieces as well. Do you have a preference? Do you find that do you have more fun working on, say, movies set in a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, or do you prefer movies set a long time ago?
I think a long time ago is probably my personal preference, although I do think Guardians of the Galaxy is a brilliant film, and I did the prep in that because by that time I was already moving on to design myself, so I went worked in the prep, which was lovely because we did all the research and everything, which was fantastic, you know, like researching worlds and everything. But so that's a film where I did the prep and then I didn't know what it was going to look like because I left.
Right.
Just they started filming, and then when I went to see the film, I was just really I thought it was fantastic. I was and actually I could see all the work that we'd done because it was quite a long lead-in time. I mean, it was at least 6 months prep, so
Sure.
you know, you can see all that work come to fruition. It was lovely.
Well, I think, you know, that it's such a great overview of your career. You worked on so many interesting films, but I think what I'd love to know is a lot of the designers we talk to have a very rigorous academic background. And I was curious, what made you decide to get into this line of work? And did you, in fact, go to school for it? And if you could give us a little bit of a sense of your background.
I didn't do costume at college. I'm certainly not academic, unfortunately. I went.
I won't tell anyone.
My dad was a cabinet maker, and when we were really young, he went back to college and became a furniture designer. So he was kind of a late starter as a furniture designer, and he worked a lot in. We had quite a mad house. He worked in the first plastics furniture. I think there's a piece of his in the V&A because it was one of the first chairs. So we had these massive fiberglass chairs around the house. So I had kind of a very ordinary background in as much as my schooling and everything, but quite odd in the actual house because we had all these, you know, things being made. So quite creative anyway. But I went to college and I did graphics because I could draw, and I did want to do fashion, and my parents persuaded me I'd never make any money at it. So and I kind of had a little leaning towards theatre, and they went, no, absolutely no money in theatre. So for some reason, they obviously got, you know, pushed me towards graphics, which I could actually, I never really did graphics. I ended up doing illustration on my course. I went to St. Martin's School of Art, and I was on the graphic design course, and I came out of it the other end as an illustrator, and that's what I did.
Wow. Now, when you did that, did you start doing that professionally?
Yeah. I worked for about I'd say about 8 years illustrating as a living. I had a studio with a couple of fellow illustrators, and I was doing quite a lot of. I mean, I really did prefer drawing clothing. So I was going towards fashion illustration, and I did. I mean, I did quite a bit. I won a competition for Vogue at some point, and you know,
were you
it was okay, but it's a very lonely life, an illustrator's life.
Now, were you a film fan growing up? Did you watch a lot of movies?
Old movies.
Did you have favorites?
Really, we had, I mean, I'm sure people have said this to you before, but in England on a Sunday afternoon and a Saturday afternoon as kids, you just sit and watch the big Hollywood movies, whatever was on, because
Right.
they were just screened all the time. I mean, it's really funny that now it's so difficult to see them. You know, you'd watch All About Eve at the age of, I don't know, 13 on the after telly, and Harvey was my favourite. I was a child.
Of course it was.
Yeah, and I didn't think it was about alcoholism. It was just about a rabbit. That's you know, it was those kind of, you know, that kind of, I suppose it's late 30s, 40s, 50s, particularly. I mean, I really love 40s films.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great periods of both English and American film.
Yeah.
I'm a huge. All About Eve is one of my favorite. To this day, it's still one of my favorite movies of all time.
Fantastic movie. Yeah, really fantastic. Some Like It Hot is another is something that I mean, a film that I just can watch again and again. I mean, they're kind of, I mean, they're the obvious, but I love them.
Oh, they're amazing. I mean, you know, you can't go wrong with those. But But those films, I mean, all the clothes in those movies and the design work is sumptuous. I mean, it does have that old Hollywood sheen to it. But
Yes.
do you think that the movies like that pushed you into being more artistically inclined? Were you taking away from that you said you were drawn to fashion illustration, but were you a fan of fashion before you got into illustration?
I I do love fashion. I love clothes, actually. I really love clothes. You can't tell, but I'm 6 foot. So I think there was a part of me when I was young, because I was very tall from a very young age, that was desperate to be able to wear all the things that everybody else could wear. So it was mainly longing for things that I couldn't have and I couldn't wear because I was too tall. But no, I've always yeah, I've always had a thing about clothes. So I mean, I actually costume, clothes, fashion, they're not different to me. I know they are to some people. I don't see it as different. I'm as interested in something that somebody wore 300 years ago as I am about something that's just come out in the most recent magazine. And I think there's parallels all the time.
Right.
You know, and I mean, I watched something the other day, actually. It wasn't a brilliant film, but it had Ori Kelly's costumes. And I was just like, oh, I'd wear that now. I'd wear that veil. It's a spotty dress and a spotty veil and a spotty hat. It's fantastic.
Well, growing up, did you grow up and mostly go to school in the UK?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
were you a punk rocker in your younger days? I mean, the birth of the Sex Pistols, or were you a mod? Were you a rocker?
I think you'd probably say I was a bit more of I don't know. I used to wear quite a lot of 50s clothes.
Well, okay. So Bobby socks.
When I came to London to go to college, so I was in the Midlands, where there was, the choices were really, really, really poor. I mean, there really was nothing, and it was all kind of flares and, I don't know, halter neck tops and things, really sort of late 70s stuff. And then hit sort of London, and there was just vintage stuff in all the, I mean, it was a fantastic time that we had got a lot of American imports, because I think it was used as ballast in the ships, wasn't it? So there's these big stores. And they were just full, and we were poor, so it's the cheapest clothes, and you could change your clothes every week. Just go and buy something new. So anything, secondhand clothes we were wearing, antique clothes, vintage clothes. So I loved them.
Now, did you start altering them and changing them around? Yeah. Did you have to make things work for you?
Yes, yeah. Although I've never been a massive sewer. I like the styling of them. I mean, I wore 50s hats and things. I mean, it must have looked ridiculous, but I mean, I didn't care at the time. and being really tall, and I years after leaving college, I think I had a leopard skin coat, and I described it to a friend of mine, and I said I tried it on, and I must have put on so much weight because it was so small. And he went, it was always really small, Sharon. It never fitted you. So it obviously just kind of, wore things regardless. Yeah, it's great. I'll wear it.
Well, yeah, I mean, that it's that kind of a journey always fascinates me, because it has to have, informed your art. And when you started doing illustration, were there designers, or were there things that you said you always liked drawing clothes? Were you drawing all kinds of clothes, or were you attracted to period wardrobe? Were you drawing punk?
No, I was really attracted. There was I got one of my drawings got into a couple of competitions, which I drew my sister, who was modeling at the time, so she looked lovely and things. But I don't know how I managed to get it. I got a Comme des Garçons hat. It's like a jockey's hat, and this striped jacket. Just brilliant, such brilliant shapes, and it's a really big drawing, which I still have. It's one of the few I've still got. But I liked at the time, I really liked the Japanese designers and the kind of madness that they were doing to draw. I couldn't really afford to wear them.
Well, so you've gone to college, you're going through illustration school, and then you found your way into the film business. Was the film business when you initially arrived, and you working on Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and a Lover?
Yeah.
Were there things about the business that were unexpected for you?
The whole of the set was unexpected because I didn't really, I didn't know how it worked. So that was kind of unexpected. I mean, I think things like, it was just a new world. I mean, I've been on fashion shoots by that point, and I've been a stylist, and I was running the illustration alongside working with stylists because I thought that's where I wanted to go. And also I thought it helped I wanted to do fashion illustration, not ordinary illustration by that point. So I thought I was going in that direction. So, and a still shoot is, very small, and it has a model, and there's the model, the photographer, the photographer's assistant, it's all quite contained. And then suddenly you're on a film set and it's huge and there's loads of people. So the whole thing was quite fresh and new and exciting. And actually for loads of people, for somebody who's, I'd spent by that point probably 8 years, a lot of the time you're alone. When you're drawing, not with anybody, you're just sort of drawing, and people were delivering projects by bike. So I just see a bloke in a bike helmet, lift it up, hand me the job, I'd do the job, I'd send it back, I was doing book jackets and all sorts of stuff, but it's quite a sort of solitary, quiet time. So going on a film set and all the noise and lots of interesting things.
a different sort of a life. Now, when watching all those movies as a kid, did you watch all different kinds of films? Like when you got the job on Star Wars, had you seen science fiction movies? Were you a Star Wars fan?
I was actually, Blade Runner is one of my favorite films. I still watch it in awe, everything, the design, the costume.
And the clothes are still great.
They're fabulous. Yeah.
The design is so great.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. Now, even kind of glass of whiskey and things, the glasses and everything. Yeah.
So when you worked on Robin Hood that Ridley Scott directed, did you fangirl out when you're working on a Ridley Scott movie? Did you tell him at some point?
No, but I was in a meeting where he did some drawings. Gosh, they're beautiful because he can really draw. He was trying to explain there was something, one part of it, there was some children in the forest and they'd got a bit feral, and he did some drawings and I really wanted one of the drawings.
I bet he would have given it to you.
No, I think Janty took it. Janty Yates. Janty took it.
She's great too.
Yeah, she is. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, Blade Runner. It's funny. You go back and you look at that film, and it's groundbreaking in so many ways. The special effects visionary Douglas Trumbull just passed away, who worked on that film. But why do you think it is? Because a lot of costume designers and designers and people have looked at Blade Runner. I mean, the film, it's 40 years old this year.
Oh, but it doesn't look 40 years old.
No. Why do you think that is? What is it about Blade Runner that has this quality, this timeless, even though it's set in Los Angeles of 2019, but even to this day, it's still cited by so many people I talk to as
19. I didn't even think about it. Yeah,
I know we're past where Blade Runner took place.
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
I mean, I went to see it at the cinema with an old boyfriend, and he took me along, and I hadn't thought about it, and I had no idea what it was. I had no idea. I didn't even know it was sci-fi. I had no idea, and I kind of came out with my jaw dropped. I was just like, I can't believe that. That was the most fantastic thing I've ever seen. I was watching every frame, and I think partly because I think the costumes are beautiful, and they're beautiful even when they're kind of degraded. I think there's some really, really fabulous imagery in there. So the polythene Mac that she get every time I watch it, and she gets killed in that. I'm just like, what an amazing decision to have made.
Right.
She being a plastic Mac.
I mean, pretty audacious.
Yes, completely.
Poor Joanna Cassidy. Poor Zora. Shot in the back. She runs through the glass.
It feels like maybe it's the combination of everything as well. It's not just the costumes. It's the casting worked. The hair and makeup is fantastic. The kind of stripe across the eye on Dale Hannah, and that kind of 40s sort of, but not quite 40s. That sort of, it's 40s, 80s does 40s kind of suiting, and it's still brilliant.
Yeah, it's just such even to this day, the especially for designers and anybody that's interested in the look of films, it certainly stands unparalleled in cinema history. So I don't know if it'll ever be surpassed. But so you eventually jumped up and became a costume designer yourself.
Eventually, yes. Yes.
And you took the reins. You're now in charge.
But you see, the thing was that I was working on such great projects with such good designers. It was really hard to leave. I kept thinking I really should be designing myself, and then somebody would get something and you think, oh, that's so good, and I probably won't get that myself. So I go and do that.
But that's perfectly understandable.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, as a designer, when you're setting out, you're very lucky if you get something that's period or sci-fi, or what you tend to get is kind of low budget domestic dramas,
right?
Because that's what people will trust you with.
So they're not. You don't get Blade Runner right out of the gate.
No, you don't. I'm afraid. Well, maybe some people do. It wasn't coming my way, and so it takes quite a lot to walk away from. I don't know. Guardians of the Galaxy, even if you're the assistant designer and not the designer, with all that kind of fascination, and do people who are having a very depressing life in a difficult part of London, with guns and.
Well, let me ask you this: for people, there's a lot of people that listen to this show who are obviously aspiring designers. Could you talk a little bit about the importance of working underneath people, apprenticing and learning the craft? Because I know a lot of people, they just want to jump into it and be in charge. But did you find that spending the time and working with talented people was a real benefit that helped you? Would you recommend that for anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I came from an artistic background, and I could draw, but I couldn't sew. I didn't understand. I didn't have the names for fabrics or the words. I hadn't dealt with dressing people or looking at people's shapes or bodies. I mean, as an illustrator, you're looking at people in a slightly different way. You're not unclothing them rather than clothing them. But there's so many aspects of the design process that I didn't know, and I have to say that I feel on all the projects that I did that I learned all the time, right up until, I mean, I haven't worked on a big sort of Marvel job until I did the prep on Guardians of the Galaxy. So that was another way of working. I'd never, for all the jobs that I've done, I hadn't worked in a room with 4 illustrators, for instance. And how you work with, I mean, on a job that size, you've got the illustrators, then you've got the workroom, then you've got the dye shop, then you've got the leather workers, then you've got the jewelry makers, so on and so forth. And Alex is obviously giving them all the artistic direction, but I'm having to make sure that that's been followed through. And it was a kind of walk round in the morning. I mean, you're sort of walking around a city of people, making sure that everybody's okay. Do they need more information? Do they need more of this and this? And in doing that, you're learning. It's
sure.
Yes, and you're also seeing people at their craft. So yes, I think it's really important, and also the way that people work with actors. I mean, you also see, you know, there's mistakes made. You see those. You need to learn from mistakes. Happily, not your own sometimes. But I think it's very, very important. And I had no idea of any of that when I started The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover.
Right.
You know, none of that. I didn't know any of that. And probably at that point, if you just said, "Would you like to design it?" I would have gone, "Yeah, oh yeah, do that." You're always confident about what you don't know.
Right. And some people do that. They say
Yeah.
yes, and they get those jobs.
Yeah.
And it can be a little daunting or difficult, or maybe not work out.
Yes.
But so you finally decide though to become a costume designer. And how did your job, the day-to-day change for you as a designer?
I suppose it's because then as an assistant designer, you have a lot of responsibility. You don't have the ultimate responsibility, which is, I suppose, the confidence to think that what you've done is you've made the right decision. Because when you're working for somebody, you're supporting their decision.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that goes through, and supporting them in thinking they've made the right decision as well. Sometimes, I mean, when I design, I rely on my assistants to sort of give me a bit of a, you know, no, you're doing the right thing every so often. I mean, that's the relationship that you have. But I think that's the most important, the most important thing, and also working with the actors, because I think as an assistant designer, you don't do that much of that. You do a little bit with day players, and but you're not really involved in either talking people through their characters or taking on board their input. So that's all kind of new. I think it's not social side of things. I think the interaction with actors, directors, DOPs is the side that you have to get used to as a designer that I didn't have to do.
When you're working as a designer, you also have to work with the other visual stylists, the production designer, and the director of photography. What is your relationships? Was that something new for you, having to interact with different department heads? And like, obviously, when you're working with a production designer, you have to make sure that, say, the colors of the costumes don't conflict with what the set design is. Or do you work in tandem with other departments?
Yeah, very much so. And the first things that I started to do when I was designing were commercials, and I worked with a very, very fastidious commercials director who's really particular and insists on all departments working together. And his commercials are very beautiful, but they're very quiet commercials. They're not loud or anything. They're very domestic. But it's really important to him that every colour works together, the textures work together. It's usually realism, but it's you know, you have to believe it. So and I think I've been working with him now, it feels like forever. I think I've been working with him for sort of 10 to 15 years, and he uses great DOPs. So it's, you know, like Bruno Debonel and people like that. So it's really, you know, you're really working with the top people just on something quite small. And I think that's given me a sort of background in it. And I think from being an illustrator as well, and coming from sort of a direction that you would think I would go into the art department, and I, you know, I hope that I kind of have a bit of a kind of broader look at things than just costume.
Did your job get exponentially more difficult now that you were the costume designer?
Yeah.
What were some of the things that maybe when you're making the transition and now you're calling the shots, were there things that was it difficult to adjust now that you were in charge? Or did you just hire great people that you'd already worked with? So it was a seamless transition.
I never seem to hire the set, no, not because apparently people, you know, it's not because I'm unpopular or anything, but because I seem to have these kind of gaps in between jobs and lose people who are all going, oh, sorry, Sharon, I can't come back on this one. So you just think, I've just got the right people, it's brilliant. And then I have to start with new people. So I'm always having to get used to new people. Sorry, I've lost the train of the question. Yeah.
No, I mean, just now that you're in charge, the job's getting more difficult, and you're dealing more directly with actors, I would imagine. And what's that like? I mean, now that your costume is one of the for an actor, I've always said to people that some of your key hires are hair and makeup and the costume department, because you're dealing directly with the actors. And one of the first line of defenses that a director has or a producer has is to make sure the actors feel good and they look good, and they know that their clothes look good, and they know that their clothes and their makeup and hair is serving the character the way they see it. And it's a huge responsibility. So what was that like for you?
I actually really like actors' input. I think collaboration makes for the best costumes. That's what I feel, because I mean, I have very strong likes and dislikes, and I know what I like and don't like, but I do like it being challenged, because then sometimes you just get that little edge that makes it that much better because it wasn't your idea. It's like sometimes sending people out for things and they bring something back that you don't really like, but you don't throw it away, and then one day you think, that's just the perfect thing, I didn't even like it, but I just know that's going to work.
Right.
So it's not all your taste, and it's not, it's just so, for instance, it's not just it was Calm with Horses, or any of the jobs that I've done. I really like the input of the actors, and I try and speak to them as early as possible to see what they feel. Sometimes they don't want to have much input, but quite often if you open it up, they do. And it makes them more comfortable, and then they're really happy to sort of try things out as well, because you've allowed them to have some input.
Well, speaking of the great, I suppose we should address it. I have to say that it was not necessarily my first choice to watch, but my girlfriend Elizabeth was watching it one day, and I'm like, I thought it was just going to be another masterpiece theater. I didn't realize how funny it was going to be.
It's funny.
I mean, and the acting and how much fun everyone's having. I mean, it's a great show.
Yeah.
But, I'm curious, obviously you're depicting historical figures, obviously, but they're not exactly speaking the way they would speak or act the way they would act. No. But when you were hired for that job, how much was historical accuracy important to you, if at all? And where did you start? And was the approach to this whole thing something you were expecting or not? Because the humorous elements and.
Well, I'd seen season 1, so I knew it was going to be, it was sort of satirical, and there was things about season 1 that I really liked, and I thought they were the charm of it, which was that it was like a massive the palace was like a massive dormitory, and nobody would have like locks on the doors, and as you say, nobody walks, talks, speaks, moves as if they're in period costume.
Right.
So that I knew that that was going to be there and was going to be a challenge. I think I had to sort of really, really study the period. It isn't my favorite period, because it's quite for the women, and it's actually prefer the men's slightly, but the women's dresses, they do something, and that's what they do. And you're looking at portraits of wealthy women who are probably, being asked to portray a certain way. You've no idea really that that the clothes that have survived are the only things that people wore, or that the people who are painted it's the only way that people wore the clothes. So I do think that you can take history and historical costume and try and bring it alive a bit more. I mean, that's very much what I wanted to do. I thought that Tony's language and the script and the way the actors were working, it was bringing the whole thing alive. And it is, I mean, it is Catherine the Great, but it's only based on Catherine the Great.
Right. It's by no means an accurate portrayal. Yes, but that's what makes it kind of fun. I mean, that's kind of an interesting question. We've got shows like Bridgerton, The Great. There's now this sort of retconning of history and making it more contemporary. Do you think that's philosophically a good thing to do? Like, I'm sure there's going to be people growing up, they'll watch The Great and they'll be studying the period in history going, well, wait a minute. You mean Catherine the Great isn't like how Elle Fanning portrayed her?
No, she isn't. But she actually, there's more parallels than you'd imagine. She was very charismatic, I think. I think that things obviously go in fashions, and there's, if you're making this amount of television, you have to make things for all sorts of people, and this is, you're appealing to a wider range of people. I do think that sometimes historical things can get really dry and quite boring, and nobody knows what people said to each other, or really, from a few extant dresses, for instance, for Catherine the Great, there's a few things left over, and they're in the Hermitage Museum. They're really not looking their best. She was forced out. They're not attractive things. Do you need to see them on screen? But interpretations of them, I doubt it really. There's the written word about her is much more fascinating. I mean, they're changing clothes five times a day. I mean, you don't get that impression by looking at a few staid portraits and some rather large caftan type dresses in the Hermitage. So, I mean, from a personal point of view, when I watch something that's quite historical and it's supposed to be historical fact and it isn't historical fact, I find it a bit irritating. But when it's not supposed to be historical fact, that's fine. Bridgerton's not supposed to be real, is it?
What? What do you mean it's not real?
It's absolutely not real.
Come on now.
But it's kind of, it is in the end entertainment. I mean, I've read quite a few things where people have obviously criticised their costumes because they're not totally accurate. But I mean, who knows what? I mean, there's no paintings of pregnant queens at that period. How does anybody know what she was wearing?
I mean, people seem to think they do. But I think though that you also have to make the show, like you said, you're making entertainment. You don't want people to think that they're watching paint dry. One of the challenges you faced was the pandemic. And what was it like? I mean, were there challenges that because you're designing, you can't just necessarily go to the store and buy something you need. You either have to rent it or again build it. What were some of the challenges you faced working on The Great, shooting during the pandemic?
Well, there was actually total lockdown. We went into lockdown in England. So any shops that weren't, supplying the NHS or, key workers were just closed down. So all the fabric shops were closed. So we had a huge problem. It was quite stressful. We'd just before, while the pandemic was happening, we could still get certain things, and but you were queuing to get into shops. Everything was so slow. None of the antique markets were open, so none of the vintage dealers were going. So all the jewelry and the buttons and the ribbons and the pretty things that make it all kind of look lovely, we couldn't go to see them. So we had to sort of approach it differently. It was strange, really strange. The people who made the headdress, one of them's my friend Katie Hackney, who made the beautiful coronation headdress. I mean, she was meeting the jeweler who was making it, Mike, in the back garden in the snow, and they had it propped up in on a dustbin or something. You know, there was just like people couldn't meet inside. I couldn't see them. So
now, was that her crown? Was that her coronation crown? Or
the coronation, the actual crown was made in Italy and sent from Italy, and the headdress, which is a kind of Russian, I've written it down somewhere, kokoshnik, that was made in London.
Okay.
Not in somebody's back garden, but that's the only place that they could meet, you know, COVID friendly, that they could have a look at it and then send me the pictures. But we had people posting us jewelry, dealers posting us jewelry, really nice people doing the same with some fabrics, and then we chose them. We were getting people to go into their shops, because they were allowed to go into their shops. What they couldn't do is sell from their shops. They go into their shops, they'd take the fabric home, they'd wrap it up, they'd put it on the doorstep, and the driver would go and collect it. I was going on eBay every night and buying off eBay, which was just, you know, which is really
wow.
I got some extraordinary things, but it was just, you know, just the oddest way to work.
I can only imagine. Well, tell us about, I mean, you said the crown was made in Italy.
Yeah.
How did you go about doing that? And was the crown based on something real, or did you design it from scratch?
The actual crown, the jeweled crown, is it's a copy of the imperial crown of Russia. And the jeweler that made it in Italy, that's what they do. They make jewels, and they're a hire company, so they made it for us, and then they had it back, so they made it new to hire, it's called. So we sent them plenty of pictures, but they're easy to get because it's still the imperial crown of Russia, locked away.
There hasn't been a king or a queen around those parts in a while.
But it did get sent out during lockdown and came through customs, and Elle tried it on and it didn't fit, and it had to go back to just be slightly altered, and that was over Christmas, and then come back, and it arrived just in time with like 2 days to spare.
Wow.
I know.
That's not something I wouldn't want that. Like,
no.
But you didn't panic.
We had a backup, but it wasn't as good.
Now, one of the things, would you say that Catherine the Great, the way that Elle Fanning is playing her, did Catherine the Great utilize fashion as a political power move? Did
yes.
she did?
Yeah, she did. I think she was the way she reads in you know, kind of various, I mean, accounts of her, is that she was very charismatic, very intelligent, not particularly beautiful. When she was young, she did have a very good figure, but at that time, who was it? Was it Elizabeth was on the throne? I hope I'm right in that. And she was just, you know, she was married to Peter, but quite young about court, and she had to be very careful about how she portrayed herself so that she didn't steal somebody else's limelight. But there are accounts of her doing something. There's one where she all the ladies were dressed for a party, and she turned up and she just had a simple white dress with one big rose on it. Looked stunning because they all looked overdressed. You know, there was things like that. And she wore a man's uniform to go and see the troops, and yeah, she was quite clever, I think.
Well, now one of the dress that you created for her coronation, the gold dress.
Yeah.
Now, how important was that dress to not just be stunning, but also she's delivering a message, you know, to her court when she's being during that coronation. Tell us a little bit about that dress, and how did you go about making it? Was it based on anything?
It was scripted that she sees you know, she's trying to appeal to the Russian people, and you know, she's a German. She's just sort of come in, taken the throne, needs to appeal to them. That at that time in the court, it was all French fashion, but outside of the court, the Russian people had, it's a very a long-standing kind of folk costume. Would you call it folk costume? Traditional costume. And what the women wore is something called a sarafan, which is that sort of pinafore, trapeze-like garment. And the big golden headdress is similar to the shapes of the headdresses that they wear. So the idea is, in the script, she sees a painting of a woman in traditional dress, and she decides that's what she's going to do, because it's obviously Catherine the Great and Elle, and Elle's also pregnant. It was actually great because it hid her pregnancy, because it would have been that shape whether she was pregnant or not. It was really good for Elle, because it's quite difficult to have a coronation and be pregnant, and and look fantastic, and it all kind of worked together. So it is a very, very glamorous version of a proper Russian sarafan.
Sure, but look great.
Yeah, she's very happy. So was I.
Now, what about all the yellow? The yellow in the dresses in your season. What was that about?
There was actually the first season. Because there's a couple of reasons for that. The first season, there was a lot of pastels, and she's very young. And when we came to the second season, Elle and I suppose the thing is, she is still really young. So although she was pregnant, the idea was to keep her, change the sort of drama of the dresses so that they become more bold, but keep the colours in these kind of blues and yellows, etc. We did obviously hit a bit of a problem with the lockdown, and we were slightly locked into the things that had been bought. There suddenly wasn't a kind of wealth. So I think you get a kind of slightly more yellow than I would have liked, say, at any given point, because I couldn't break it up. I couldn't get the colours in there, otherwise there would have been probably a pale green, for instance, or it was literally just the way that we were working with sort of getting fabrics in, and we got all these lovely pastels, but they were mainly in the blue and the yellow area, and then it got to lockdown. We had to use what we had that was her kind of world, really. And also I think she's kind of there's certain things that really suit Elle herself, and sometimes you have to work with that. She just looks gorgeous in those kind of soft, lovely color. She's got perfect skin. She looks lovely in most colors, really. But I moved towards, I had the reds in mind for further on, just as she kind of gains more power, really.
Now, you've worked on a lot of television series. Is there a difference between the work involved and the speed involved from as far as television compared to films?
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have one that you prefer, and could you talk a little bit about the differences?
I think it's much calmer working on films. Feels much calmer. I think the thing with TV is you have to get so much in the day or in the week that you get an awful lot of scene changes. You get an awful lot of costume changes, which is makes life quite difficult for particularly the ground crew, if you like, the guys and everything. And when you're doing, there's the Great's the first kind of, I've done episodic TV, but not with 10 episodes. The writing is still going on as you're working, so you have a vague idea of what's happening ahead, but not completely. And I think that makes it kind of quite hard on the costume design team really, because you're never quite sure. You know, we did I mean, we made some lovely costumes for people, and they only came in once. I was hoping they'd come back. I was going to send Tony a list of people we made, you know, costumes. Could you bring him back? It was such a nice coat, you know. But when you're doing a film, or you know, you've got the lead-in time. Usually you've got one script, and they often change the script, but it is just the script, you know, the characters, the script, and so you've got sort of one big lead-in, and often by the end of filming it's much lighter, whereas I think it's the same on most people that I know that are working on TV say the same. I mean, you're at the same speed the whole way through, really.
Sure. Well, yeah, it does look to me though, when you watch The Great, it's a great looking show. I mean, you guys, the whole crew does a tremendous job. I mean, you guys have done a really wonderful job on making that show.
Yeah, it looks lovely together, doesn't it? And
it really does. I mean, it's a really, and the actors too. I mean, it's a lot of fun to watch. Like, it was funny because I guess in my mind, I knew that it was coming out, but you know, especially when you live with somebody and you watch different things, you half the time the experience, I walk in and Elizabeth, my girlfriend, is watching something and I will have heard of it, but I hadn't seen it. And I'm like, oh, that's what this is, you know, and you'll come in and she's like, well, I'm on episode 3. And so you don't have a context. So the look of something, it kind of grabs you immediately. And then I'm like, this is interesting. And usually what she watches interests me. So that's how I discovered The Great. I think I was 3 episodes into the first season. And then, you know, you sucked in, you sit down and suddenly it's like, well, let's watch another episode. And then you're 3 hours in or 3 or 4 episodes down. And it's like, are we going to eat dinner? But the Great was one of those shows where I found it to be so delightful. And it was so,
I think you like the characters, don't you? They're charming.
And I love the actors. I mean, I'm like, wait a minute, that's about a boy. You know, that's I love that movie.
They are actually, to a man, lovely people.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yes, but they are. So it kind of comes across on screen, I think, because they've got they're friends. So it sort of, you know, it translates onto the screen. Right.
No, it really does. I mean, it's a wonderful show, and it's so entertaining. I mean, the acting and the script, the writing it's terrific.
Yeah, no, I found it funny and I worked on it. So
that's always a good thing.
Laughed, yeah. Yeah.
Well, now let me ask you, you know, a lot of people that watch these or listen to these podcasts or watch the version on YouTube, a lot of people, the question that, and I get this a lot, even though we ask everybody who's on the show, what advice can you give to people? I mean, obviously you had extensive training, you know, you worked your way up through the ranks. But when people are just starting out, how can they begin? What do you suggest people do that want to get into costume design, and how should they start? What kind of an educational background do you think that they need?
I don't necessarily think that people have to do a costume course. Actually, I think an art course is very good because I think it sort of broadens your mind, and I mean, you know, one of the people that I really want to work with again on my crew is a great illustrator, and he's great doing graphics on the computer and that sort of thing, but his strength might not be fabrics. You know, everybody has a different, and actually as the jobs get more complicated and bigger, you need different kinds of people in a team. So I think that an art course is a very good place to start. I think sometimes some time in a costume house is good, just to actually be amongst old costume. They're quite, you know, they're not always in good condition, they're not always fabulous, but it's quite a good training for dates and time, and just to get your head into, unless you love history, you know, you really need to kind of have some idea of the past, I think, in order to even to interpret it for the future. I think it's, you know, I mean, I personally have a bit of a love of history, so I think it served me well. And then I just think that people need to learn. So start, you know, training positions.
Always something good to do. I mean, obviously more knowledge is always beneficial.
Yeah.
Nowadays people are everybody wants to jump into things though right away.
Yes.
And so how important do you think it is for people to apprentice under designers, or is getting those kinds of jobs as being an assistant or getting time on set? How important is that?
I think it's really important for smooth running of things. And I don't mean that, I mean, just mean for everybody's stress and tension. I mean, films and TV are quite stressful environments sometimes. And I mean, there's a lot of money at stake as well. And
Right.
I think, that having some idea of what you're doing, I mean,
Always a good thing there.
Always a good thing. And I think, if I'd have tried to do something like The Great, even, halfway through my career, I've been working for 30 years, the decisions that I would have made, I mean, I had to make decisions very, very quickly and feel quite calm about it. And I can do that because I know how everything works, how to manage the team, what to take away so that they're not overstretched, so that in the end what goes out in front of cameras I'm happy with as much as I can be, and I haven't killed my crew trying to get it there.
Right.
And I think sometimes when people are doing things and they're far too inexperienced or don't realize how inexperienced they are, it puts other people under an awful lot of pressure.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Especially people who are in craft. I think, I'm not a great sewer. I can sew, but not that good. But the people I watch who are pattern cutters and sewers, and the people who break down and do dyeing, they're so skilled, and they need to be, you have to know quite a lot in order to treat them with respect, I think, so that they can do their jobs properly.
Absolutely. 100%. So do you have something else that you're working on now that you can talk about? Do you have something upcoming?
Well, I might be doing The Great 3.
Well, that's good to know. That's good to hear. It's good to, can we say, has it been renewed officially yet? Can we say that?
When are you going out on air?
Oh, a couple weeks maybe.
I should know by then.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Well, good luck to you there. Break a leg on that.
You have to cut that bit out.
Well, I'm glad to hear that it's going on because the show is so great.
Yeah, no, it's being recommissioned, which is really good. Yeah.
Now, can people find you on social media? Are you on Instagram?
I'm on Instagram. That's all I'm on.
It's just under your name, Sharon Long?
80, I think. 80. Because there's 80 more of me out there.
So you're Sharon Long 80.
Yeah. I don't know why it's 80, but I am.
That's a nice round number.
Yeah. I think I think I just got a bit bored going up through the numbers, and it kept saying there was other people there. So I was just like, just jump a few.
Well, that's a good choice. Well, listen, it was very great to speak with you today, and it was terrific having you. And man, I really admire the career that you've had and all the people that you've worked with. You worked on.
It made it sound quite good. I was thinking, oh no, because I've watched some of the other ones, and I was thinking, oh, people have done such great things. How are you going to build me up?
Oh, I know. I think. Look, you had me at Peter Greenaway, but. I mean, come on, you worked on Star Wars, you worked on The End of the Affair. You've worked for people like Neil Jordan's one of my favorite British directors. You worked on The Social Network when they had, I would imagine, the boat race, when they had the
Henley boat race. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the most rewatchable movies I've ever seen is The Social Network. And I love that whole scene. It made me want to take up rowing. I never wanted to do that, but I saw that movie. I'm like, I want to be a competitive rower like the Winklevoss twins. Come on now. No, that
Henley.
Yeah, it's such a great scene. But you've worked on really great stuff, and
no, I have worked. I've been really lucky. I've worked on brilliant things.
Now, since you brought that up, was that race staged only for the movie, or did they film like this year's race to get the B-roll? And
no, they put it in. We were at Henley, and Henley was happening, but it was, they must have bought the time or something. It was kind of because we all had to be dressed specifically for Henley, and it was a bit bizarre being, in a long dress or what, like kind of actually there. But it must have been a piece of time that they bought, like a half hour of.
Wow. Yes, they got to.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit kind of bonkers, isn't it?
But it looks great. I mean, it is David Fincher, who's one of the most exacting stylists, directors around. I mean, I'm sure the studio is probably like, well, can't you just do it here in the States? No.
I know. No, it was all shipped. Everything was, obviously all the principal costumes were shipped over. I was just taking it and doing that bit and then sending it back. But yeah, it was quite bizarre.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love that scene. They're playing in the Hall of the Mountain King, that version of the music over the races. Anyway, I'm a film geek, and I could probably bend your ear for another hour, or 2 or 4, talking about very specific scenes. But I won't do that. I just would like to thank you for being here on the Designing Hollywood podcast, Sharon Long. What a lovely conversation we've had. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much.
And also, thank you to our sponsor, the United American Costume Company. A special thanks to our producer and founder, Martika Ibarra, and of course, our co-founder, legendary costume designer, Marilyn Vance. And our new partner, John Campea, of the John Campea YouTube channel. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that notification button. And you can find the Designing Hollywood podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Also on iTunes. Follow me, Robert Meyer Burnett, on Instagram, on Twitter at BurnettRM, or find me on my own YouTube channel, The Burnett Work. Thanks for watching. We very much appreciate it.